I love it when industry changes. That's a lot of my work has been about industry shifts, and yet this particular example of Franklin Leonard kind of shows a really interesting way of doing it. So Franklin was actually fired from McKinsey. This is where I pick him up in the story. Fired from McKinsey and was a data analyst and was just bored out of his mind there. And so when they were streamlining, he was like, I would love to get off this boat. And he ends up binge watching a Netflix weekend and sits there and stares at the TV and thinking about what's he going to do next with his life. And he realizes the one thing he's always loved since the time he was a kid was movies. And he's like, why don't I just go to Hollywood and get a job? So he shows up and he does those classic assistant jobs where his job is to fetch paper and bring coffee and because he's like, whatever, I will do whatever, even though he's a Harvard graduate. And at one point, after a year he's been in this industry and basically doing relatively grunt-level work, his job is actually to find the scripts that could matter and basically pre-read them so his bosses can then have his opinion. And he's finding just the shittiest scripts, just the worst. And he's like, they're going to think I suck at this job. So he sends out a note. He basically figures out everyone he's met in the course of the last year, goes through his entire day planner, writes an email under an alias, and says, I'm looking to find better scripts. And he doesn't use his real name because he doesn't want to look like he doesn't know what he's doing in his job. And he says, and in return, and I met you sometime in the last year, so it's somebody you know, and in return for doing this questionnaire of 3 questions, I will collate back up the data so you all also have access to better scripts. What do you think? And so the questions were, what do you love that hasn't been in production but you saw in the last year? He does the little McKinsey data algorithm pivot table thing, publishes it, goes on vacation. And this was back in the day when you could actually go on vacation and leave your technology behind. So he comes back 2 weeks later and his inbox is flooded with people saying, this list is amazing and we should all use it to resort how we pitch to our bosses. And no one knew it was him. And this thing has actually grown. It's now 10 years old, and it has something like 300 of the top 1,000 films that have been produced were his. So if you actually stack rank them, most of them came through this vehicle of Blacklist. And he changed his industry, and I'm going to slow down and repeat what the questions were that he asked. He said, what do you love that hasn't been put into production and you've seen in the last year? And it's that first question, what do you love, that changed everything. Because Hollywood was already sorting, but they were sorting on a different question, which is, how do we make money? And so they had lost their way, right? An industry that's about storytelling had forgotten how to pick good stories because they were finding a different criteria by which to sort. And so Franklin, by the power of that crowdsourcing kind of model, is able to assert a new lens on the industry and fundamentally changes how the industry operates. And his insight was really useful for all of us, which is how can we ask new questions of our industry so that we can reshape things?